Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a dusty sunrise in Thebes, around 1400 BCE. The desert air is cool, but already whispering of heat to come. You lie on a woven mat of reeds, squinting against the early light trickling through slats in a mud brick wall. A rooster somewhere, more bark than melody, announces the day. The Nile nearby hums in its sleepy current, and a breeze wafts in smelling of clay, goat hair, and someone cooking yesterday's lentils again. You blink, yawn, stretch, and then it hits you. The taste. Your breath smells like a crypt. Not the mysterious, treasure-laden kind either. More like the foot end of a donkey stable. You grope for the pot near your bed, where a gritty, grayish mixture awaits. It's your daily dentifrice, courtesy of an ancient recipe passed down for generations. Burnt eggshells, crushed ox hooves, and a dash of pumice, all blended into something between ash and sandpaper. And you, bleary-eyed and resigned, are about to stick it in your mouth. Welcome to ancient Egyptian dental care. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see this sleepy little community stretch across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle outside and Thebes is already humming. Workers march off to the temple fields. Merchants unfold linen from their stalls, and somewhere a scribe drops his reed pen in a puddle. Life in ancient Egypt is nothing if not routine. And oral hygiene is part of that, at least if you're lucky enough to afford the tools. The earliest Egyptians didn't exactly invent brushing, but they took it seriously in their own charming way. You walk toward a small ceramic basin where your cleaning tools wait, frayed sticks from aromatic trees, soft enough to chew into bristles. Before you begin scrubbing, you reach for the dentifrice. The morning mixture made from ingredients even modern science flinches at. It smells faintly of scorched bone and clay dust. The burnt eggshells, calcined for maximum abrasiveness, are meant to scour away the grime. Crushed ox hooves add collagen-rich grit. And pumice, scraped from volcanic stone, offers a final polish that would terrify your dentist. Egyptians weren't trying to whiten their teeth per se, but to scrub away what they believed was spiritual residue. Evidence of decay and imperfection. Of course, the mixture doesn't taste good. You try not to gag as the paste hits your tongue. It's chalky, dry, and vaguely like licking a barn floor. But it gets the job done. Or so they think. Interestingly, historians still argue whether these cleaning rituals actually improved oral health or hastened its decline. The ingredients, while undeniably abrasive, may have eroded enamel faster than sugar ever could. Still, the ancient Egyptians were among the first humans to believe that a clean mouth meant not just health, but spiritual purity. You spit into a clay bowl and rinse with a splash of water that's, let's say, Nile adjacent. Brackish and slightly green, but you've had worse. As you finish, you pat your mouth dry with linen, and glance up at a wall painting of Thoth, god of wisdom, whose ibis-beak face peers knowingly down at your ritual. Would Thoth approve of your technique? Hard to say. He's more concerned with scrolls than scrolls of plaque. Around you, the neighborhood begins to move. Children scamper barefoot past donkeys. A grandmother with a spine like a fishing rod sits grinding barley into flour on a basalt slab. Her own teeth long since surrendered to the gods. You offer her a smile, and she returns one with more gums than enamel. Dental care, you realize, is not equally distributed. Still, the ritual matters. It's not just about mouth health. It's about starting the day with a small, familiar act of discipline. A gesture to the gods, perhaps, or to yourself. A fly buzzes near your cheek, landing briefly before darting away. You think about the millions of mornings before this one, and the millions to come, where someone somewhere in the Nile Valley begins their day by scrubbing their molars with burnt calcium and hope. Not exactly minty fresh, but in the desert you take what you can get. You're still wiping a bit of eggshell grit from your lips as you shuffle across the compact courtyard to the storage shelf. On it rests the small ceramic pot that holds your personal dentifrice, a blend you've just used and will use again tomorrow and the day after that. The powder looks innocent enough. Pale gray with little flecks of darker mineral, almost like dusty flour. But the story behind it? Well, it's worthy of its own myth. The ancient Egyptians didn't call it toothpaste, of course. That's a modern word, too soft and minty for what they concocted. What you're using is more like a sacred scrub, a mix of burnt, ground, and sometimes truly bizarre components. Burnt eggshells, the main ingredient, are believed to restore the strength of bone in your teeth, like borrowing nature's calcium to fix your own. You run your fingers through the dry powder, imagining the process. First, someone roasts the shells over an open flame until they crumble like old parchment. Then they're pounded with a stone pestle, mixed with ashes of ox hooves, for collagen, supposedly, and blended with a pinch of rock salt or powdered pumice to make it extra scrubby. Because nothing says good morning like dragging the surface of a volcano across your molars. The paste doesn't foam. There's no flavor enhancer, no fluoride, just friction, and a lot of it. Historians still argue whether this recipe was a miracle of early medicine or a slow-acting form of dental erosion. What's clear is that the people who used it weren't ignorant of its power. They understood that bad breath, loose teeth, and mouth pain had consequences, both in this world and the next. For nobles and priests, special formulations might include powdered myrrh or frankincense. Ingredients so sacred they were burned in temples and embalmed into kings. These versions likely smelled divine, though the smell might have been the only divine part. Still, you'd carry your little pot like a talisman. Not only was it good manners to show up to the temple without camel breath, but there was also a spiritual component to being clean of mouth. Clean of mouth. That phrase appears in burial inscriptions and prayer scrolls more often than you'd expect. It meant more than dental hygiene. It meant spiritual readiness, to speak in judgment, to offer prayers, to sing hymns to the gods. If your mouth was unclean, how could your soul be heard? And yes, even pharaohs had morning routines. Somewhere upriver, Amenhotep III is probably being dabbed by attendants with perfumed linen and handed a custom tooth powder that costs more than your mud brick house. His blend may contain crushed pearls, or rare resins from Punt, imported at ridiculous cost, all to ensure his royal smile doesn't emit royal stench. Of course, the peasants use simpler blends, just burnt barley husks and desert sand, mixed with a bit of water or spit. It's not glamorous, but it's tradition. And when you think about it, tradition is the cornerstone of ancient Egyptian life. You don't reinvent the ritual, you repeat it faithfully like chewing the same stalk of papyrus day after day. Now remember the eggshells? There's a fringe belief, held mostly in older villages, that if you burn them under a new moon and sprinkle the ashes into the Nile, it wards off tooth demons. No one's exactly sure what a tooth demon looks like, but the idea sticks. In fact, some temple inscriptions warn of spirits that creep into the mouths of the careless, drilling tiny holes with cursed beetles. Do they really exist? Probably not. But are you willing to skip your nightly brushing and find out? No, you are not. You step into a shaded colonnade where a servant is preparing another batch of the paste. He crushes the ingredients slowly, reverently. Each stroke of the mortar echoes off the stone, creating a soft rhythm that sounds to your tired ears like a heartbeat. Or a metronome. Or the gods gently tapping their fingers, reminding you that cleanliness, oral or otherwise, is next to godliness. You catch the scent of burnt bone again, and oddly find it comforting. It means you're participating in something ancient, something shared. You, the pharaoh, the priests, and the beggars at the temple gates, you all start your day with a little pot of powder and a frayed twig. There's something equalizing about that, even if your version has fewer imported spices. The sun climbs higher and the sounds of the city rise with it. There's chatter, the clop of donkey hooves on limestone, and the distant thump of a mallet shaping stone for a future tomb. Life buzzes around you. But here, in the quiet ritual of tooth cleaning, there's a stillness. A pause before the work of the day begins. You take one last glance at the ceramic pot, careful to place the lid on tight. If the powder goes damp, it'll clump, and there's nothing worse than trying to brush with ancient paste that's turned into dental putty. And as you walk away, the taste of burnt eggshell lingering at the back of your tongue, you wonder briefly, what will future generations think of your rituals? Will they marvel at your fluoride? Will they laugh at your electric brushes and foaming pastes? Maybe, but they'll know this much. Even thousands of years ago in the heart of Egypt, someone stood up, stretched, and said, "Ugh, I need to brush my teeth." Your teeth now feel like you've scoured them with a sandstorm, and honestly, that's not far from the truth. But there's one thing left to do before your morning routine is complete. Deal with the brush, or what passes for one in this part of the world. No plastic, no nylon bristles, just a thin twig, about the length of your palm, its end chewed and frayed into a fibrous mop. This is your miswak. Technically, the miswak will get popularized in later eras and regions, but ancient Egyptians already have the idea down. Cut the right kind of stick, chew the end, and get to work. You pick yours up from the ledge near the basin, tapping off some dried paste from yesterday. The wood is from the Salvador persica tree, or maybe it's just local acacia. Historians still debate which was more common in ancient Thebes. Either way, it's got a bitter, medicinal taste and just enough stiffness to scrape at your molars without sending you to the afterlife early. It squeaks faintly as you work it across your teeth. A kind of dry, woody rhythm fills your mouth. Swish, scrape, swish. It's not pleasant, but there's a certain hypnotic comfort in it. Like rubbing linen together or the feel of stone warmed by the sun. You focus on one molar at a time, letting the paste and fibers do their work. As odd as it might seem to a modern observer, this was sophisticated stuff. The idea of brushing, of physically scrubbing your teeth, was not a universal concept in the ancient world. Yet here in Egypt, people knew the value of friction and form. These chewed twigs weren't just randomly selected. They were chosen for their fibrous texture, mild antiseptic qualities, and sometimes even flavor. Some twigs had natural antimicrobial oils, something ancient Egyptians couldn't name but knew worked. Now, let's talk about technique. There was no instruction manual, of course, but plenty of wall paintings depict people bringing these sticks to their mouths. No pressure sensors, no timers, just the wisdom of repetition. You brush until it feels right, or until someone yells for you to hurry up and help unload the grain sacks. The brush itself had to be refreshed often. You'd chew off the worn end, spit it into the dirt, and start a new tip. If you were wealthy, your servant might pre-chew one for you. A bit strange? Perhaps, but also kind of touching. There's love in a freshly chewed twig, in its own papyrus-scented way. You glance across the courtyard and see your neighbor sharpening his twig with a flint knife. He waves. You wave back. The shared morning ritual connects you in a society where most days are ruled by rigid hierarchy. Pharaoh or potter, everyone brushes. There's a fringe theory among Egyptologists, yes, really, that the more affluent citizens commissioned custom-carved brushes. Gold inlaid handles, silver caps to keep the bristles fresh, maybe even animal motifs etched into the wood. A jackal, a falcon, a lounging cat. Are these stories real? The tomb evidence is spotty, but the imagery, it's irresistible. You imagine a noble delicately scrubbing his teeth with a lion-headed brush, while a harpist plays softly in the background. Dental drama in D minor. Meanwhile, your own brush is a bit split and starting to curve. Time to replace it soon. But not just yet. You pause for a moment and run your tongue across your teeth. It's not smooth. More like sandstone than porcelain, but it's clean. Cleaner anyway. And in ancient Egypt, where breath was seen as a spiritual essence, that counts for something. You take a drink from a lukewarm clay jar and rinse your mouth out. It tastes a bit like yesterday's lentils, but it clears the dust. You look down at your twig again. There's something almost poetic about it. No batteries, no fuss. Just a bit of tree and human persistence. It reminds you that even the simplest tools can hold power. Of course, not everyone has access to the good brushes. Some folks make do with chewed grass or even linen rags. Anything to scrub the day away. But the twig remains the gold standard. Even tombs have yielded little bundles of them, tucked into jars or linen pouches, as if the dead might still need one last brushing before the gods pass judgment. That idea stays with you. That even in the great halls of Osiris, a clean mouth might help your soul speak more clearly. Imagine standing before a panel of gods with plaque on your teeth. Embarrassing. As you finish up, the city begins to bloom around you. Merchants shout, sandals slap stone, and the smell of roasting garlic drifts through the air. But for a moment, you remain rooted to your spot, mouth tingling faintly from your rudimentary spa treatment, staring down at a stick that has traveled time better than most empires. And then you chew the tip a little more, reshape it just right, and set it on the ledge for tomorrow's sunrise. The sun climbs higher now, slipping its golden fingers over the tops of mud brick homes and temple walls. You hear the low murmur of prayers in the distance, priests at the local temple beginning their daily rituals. And somewhere in that echoing stone sanctuary, a man in linen robes prepares for a task far more intimate than anointment or incense. He's about to pull a tooth. You head in that direction, not out of need, at least not today, but out of curiosity. The temple isn't just a place of worship, it's also the medical center of the city. In fact, your dentist, if we can call him that, wears a priest's headdress and might chant a few hymns while yanking out a molar. Double service. As you slip into the shaded vestibule, the air cools and smells of frankincense and sweat. The walls are inscribed with scenes of healing. Imhotep, the god physician, supervising mysterious operations and holding tools that resemble something between a sewing kit and a torture device. Historians still argue whether temple healers had formal training or if most were glorified herbalists with good PR. But when your jaw swells to the size of a pomegranate, you come here. What choice do you have? The dental office is just a side chamber with a wooden stool, a reed mat, and a collection of tools laid out on a low table. There's a bronze pick, something that looks suspiciously like a fish hook, and a blunt wedge probably designed for leverage rather than finesse. You wince just looking at them. A patient sits nervously holding his jaw. He's clearly in pain, and the priest begins by reciting a short prayer to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of both plagues and healing. You can't help but note the duality. The gods here giveth toothaches, and the gods taketh them away, if you're lucky. The priest then sprinkles natron, that multi-purpose salt, used for both mummification and antiseptic cleaning, into a bowl of water. He swishes his fingers in it, a ritual cleansing, or possibly just the ancient Egyptian equivalent of Purell. Either way, it's better than nothing. There are no anesthetics, unless you count a stiff gulp of date wine or a deep belief in the power of prayer. Some claim mandrake root can numb pain, but it's rare and often more trouble than it's worth. You watch as the priest steadies the man's head and inserts a curved tool into his mouth. There's a sharp sound, not a scream, just a grunt, and something comes free. A broken tooth, yellow and cracked, lands in a dish with a wet clink. The patient exhales like he's just given birth. To distract him, an assistant dabs his forehead with oil and offers a small, carved amulet in the shape of a baboon. Whether for comfort or luck, it works. He walks out clutching it tightly. It makes you think about how dental care in this world is as spiritual as it is physical. Pain isn't just a symptom to be treated. It's a message from the gods, or perhaps a consequence of unclean living. Healing is an act of ritual, not science. You don't just get better, you get forgiven. Outside the chamber, scrolls of papyrus are stacked high, containing prescriptions and magical formulas. Some sound practical, Apply crushed onion with honey to the jaw. Others are less so. Place a dead mouse in the mouth overnight to draw out the spirit of rot. You decide not to try that one, but even amid the superstition, you sense a real desire to understand the human body. The Egyptians mapped the pulse, tracked symptoms, even speculated about how breath moved through the body. Of course, they thought it traveled through channels linked to the heart, but hey, everyone has to start somewhere. You hear a story from one of the acolytes about a scribe whose toothache vanished after sleeping with a green scarab under his pillow. Is it true? Who knows? But in a world lit by oil lamps and ruled by omens, the placebo effect might as well be divine intervention. Back outside, the city roars again. A breeze stirs the dust. You imagine the priest sitting down to lunch, wiping blood from his hands with linen before tearing into flatbread. No gloves, no rinse, just faith. You glance at your own smile reflected in a bronze mirror, wavy and imperfect, but enough to see that your molars are still intact, for now. But you make a mental note. If anything starts to throb or swell, you're heading straight to the temple. Because while the tools may look like they came from a tomb robbery, and the prayers might seem odd to your modern brain, there's comfort in knowing someone, be it priest or God or just a guy with steady hands, is there to help. And hey, maybe he'll throw in a chant for good luck. Later in the day, you find yourself crouched beside a woman grinding wheat at a stone quern. Her hands steady as she rhythmically moves the upper stone across the lower one. The sound is dull and gritty. Scrape, grind, scrape. You greet her softly and she nods, still focused. There's flour dust in her hair, on her arms, probably in her lungs, and almost certainly in her teeth. Because here's the truth. Even in a sugar-free society, people's teeth were a wreck. It seems unfair, doesn't it? No Snickers bars, no caramel, not even raisins stuck in your molars. Just bread, beans, beer, and the occasional dried fig. But the real villain here isn't sugar. It's sand, and rocks, and millstones. You glance at the flour she's making. It's speckled with grit, microscopic fragments of stone that chip off during grinding. Day after day, Egyptians eat bread laced with what amounts to edible sandpaper. Soft on the tongue, cruel to the enamel. You remember reading, well, hearing, that ancient Egyptian skulls often show advanced tooth wear, with the enamel worn down to the dentin. Some even to the pulp. This isn't decay from sweets, it's mechanical damage. Teeth filed down, not by dentists, but by lunch. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians realized this was causing their oral issues. On one hand, they kept grinding grain the same way for thousands of years. On the other hand, they left behind remedies, prayers, and scrolls full of toothache cures. Maybe they knew. Maybe they just accepted it. You reach down and scoop a pinch of flour, rubbing it between your fingers. It's soft, but you can feel the grit. Like fine dust laced with tiny glass shards. No wonder people lost teeth so young. No wonder elderly in Egypt meant anyone over 35. And here's a fun fact. Their beloved beer wasn't much better. Unfiltered, made from roughly crumbled bread loaves and fermented in open vats. It was hearty but crunchy. The sediment alone was like drinking a barley smoothie mixed with gravel. You'd swig it with gusto, of course. Beer was safer than Nile water, but your teeth paid the price. You watch the woman toss a handful of grain to a child who promptly puts a pebble in his mouth. She doesn't notice. You sigh. Of course, the elites had options. Their flour was sifted, their bread cleaner, but even the wealthy couldn't fully escape the plague of abrasive meals. One high-ranking official's mummy showed signs of a dental abscess that had bored a tunnel through his jawbone. A literal hole. The stuff of nightmares. And yet, life goes on. People laugh, eat, sing, drink. They bite into crunchy lotus root and gnaw on dried meat like it's no big deal. You almost admire the resilience until you remember the jawbone with 3 abscesses found in a pyramid worker's tomb. That poor soul was probably humming while hauling stones, mouth swollen like a ripening fig. There's another layer to this. Some believe the pain of worn teeth had spiritual meaning. A test? A purification. If your food hurts, you must really want it. And the gods always appreciate sacrifice, even if it's just your last molar. You take a seat and nibble a bit of bread. It tastes good, earthy, wholesome, but you catch the unmistakable crunch of grit between your teeth. Like biting sand, you resist the urge to spit it out. You glance around. A man nearby is pressing garlic into a clay bowl with his thumb. He smiles, revealing teeth that resemble worn pebbles in a stream. Smoothed, rounded, and probably hollow. He offers you some garlic. You thank him politely and decline. It makes you think, how much of daily Egyptian life was filled with quiet, constant discomfort? Aching teeth. Grit in every meal. No aspirin, no ice. Just prayers, potions, and patience. There's a certain dignity in that. No dramatics, no complaints. Just a nation chewing its way through history with admirable grit. Pun intended. And if you're wondering whether they used anything to soften their meals, well, not really. Boiling existed, but firewood was precious. Most meals were baked or fried. Texture was a given. And dental consequences? An accepted part of the deal. You run your tongue along the inside of your mouth. Still sore from this morning's eggshell scrub? Still curious about how anyone managed a full life with such unforgiving food? Then again, maybe that's why they obsessed over the afterlife so much. Because even paradise for an ancient Egyptian might just be a place with soft bread and water that doesn't taste like frog. It's later in the afternoon now, and the sun has settled into that lazy golden slump where everything seems to glow, even the dust. You're sitting beneath a canopy of woven reeds, sipping water from a painted jar that once held oil. It's warm, slightly metallic. But again, better than Nile water straight from the riverbank. Across from you, an elderly neighbor prepares what you've come to know as her special rinse. A humble mouthwash recipe passed down like a family heirloom, though its scent suggests it was invented by someone deeply at odds with comfort. A small bowl contains a mixture of natron salt, crushed mint leaves, and a few drops of old wine. Probably vinegar by now. She swishes it around with a carved stick, muttering a prayer under her breath. Mouthwash, ancient Egypt style, isn't for the faint of heart. You take a closer look. The natron, a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate and bicarbonate, was used for everything from body preservation to temple cleansing. It's the Windex of the ancient world. Effective, yes, but the taste? Like gargling a salty rock. You try a swig. It burns. Your mouth feels like it's undergoing a minor exorcism. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder if your taste buds will ever forgive you. But the mint is a nice touch. Egyptians had access to a variety of herbs. Mint, dill, chamomile, even cinnamon. And they weren't afraid to get creative. Sometimes the rinse included pomegranate peel or crushed figs for sweetness. Other times the opposite. A dollop of garlic juice. Perhaps for when you wanted to repel more than just plaque. Historians still debate whether these concoctions were meant to disinfect, perfume, or simply feel like a cleanse. Some argue they were ritualistic, connected more to spiritual purity than dental science. Others say they were purely practical. If your breath smelled like fermented lentils, people tended to step away. As you swish the rinse around your mouth, eyes watering slightly, you get the appeal. It may be bracing, but it leaves you oddly refreshed. Like standing downwind of a sandstorm, but somehow cleaner afterward. It's easy to forget in this quiet domestic moment just how many papyrus scrolls have been found detailing dental recipes like this. One particularly famous document, the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1500 BCE, includes a recipe combining honey, malachite, and powdered incense for use as a mouthwash. A little extra sparkle, perhaps. Or just a good excuse to get out of kissing distance. You lean back against the mud brick wall and think of how central scent and mouth care were to Egyptian culture. Clean breath wasn't just about comfort, it was about presence. In a society that prized articulate speech, worshipful chants, and poetic storytelling, having a clean mouth wasn't optional. It was spiritual etiquette. There's even a religious rite known as the opening of the mouth ceremony, performed during mummification. A special tool was used to ritually open the deceased's mouth, restoring their ability to breathe, eat, and speak in the afterlife. This wasn't symbolic. To the Egyptians, it was essential. Without the mouth, the soul couldn't speak the names of the gods, or even its own. You swirl the rinse one last time and spit discreetly into the dust. The mint clings to your tongue, while the natron leaves a chalky, cleansing tingle. It's not Listerine, but it's not bad either. An older man joins you with his own jar filled with a darker blend. He says it contains myrrh, crushed figs, and camel's milk. You nod politely. Then you don't ask to try it. Nearby, two children are daring each other to drink straight vinegar for bravery. One child shrieks and runs in circles, while the other nods solemnly like a tiny priest of dental fortitude. You can't help but chuckle. Even the kids understand that a clean mouth matters, even if it stings a little. As the sun begins to slide behind the palm trees, you reflect on the simplicity of it all. No corporate packaging, no influencer toothpaste. Just jars, sticks, herbs, and a deep-rooted belief that your breath, your words, and your soul are all connected. You sip the last of your water and gaze at the horizon. Somewhere, a priest is preparing a ceremonial rinse for the high priestess. Somewhere else, a farmer is gargling with sour beer. And here you are, minty and slightly singed, ready to face the rest of the day with at least moderately respectable breath. As evening creeps in and the golden light fades to bronze, you find yourself wandering through the perfumed quarter of the city. The air here is thick with the scent of myrrh, lotus, and something faintly roasted. Probably someone's dinner, or maybe just more incense. But you're not here for food. You're on the trail of love potions and, more specifically, ancient Egypt's version of fresh breath confidence. You slip into a small, fragrant shop tucked between two silversmiths. The woman behind the counter is mixing herbs in a shallow bowl, grinding them with the flat of her hand. She smiles, one tooth noticeably darker than the others, and offers you a pinch of powder to smell. It's sharp, floral, with a hint of bitterness. She explains it's a breath-freshening charm, to be taken before romantic encounters. You glance at the bowl. Crushed rose petals, dried mint, maybe even ground clove. And something else. Possibly onion skin? Yes, onion. Surprisingly, the ancient Egyptians had a peculiar relationship with onions. They ate them by the handful, rubbed them on sore feet, and believed their scent warded off disease. And in matters of love? Well, onion breath was oddly revered. Maybe not by everyone, but certain temples associated onions with divine masculinity. Go figure. You sample the powder, placing a tiny amount under your tongue as instructed. It's pungent, your eyes water a little. But there's a strange warmth, a clarity. Like drinking very strong tea while being slapped by a spice merchant. This, your guide explains, is a seduction blend. To sweeten your breath, yes, but also to imbue your words with charm. Make your tongue speak, honey, she says. The spell is half scent, half suggestion. Historians still debate whether these recipes were meant for actual oral hygiene or if they served more mystical purposes. Love, persuasion, maybe even luck and debate. Some scrolls mention using date syrup and frankincense to anoint the lips before a court case or a marriage proposal. Makes sense. Nobody wants to argue with someone whose mouth smells like a goat pen. You step back outside, your breath now flavored like a herbal dessert. You pass a young man sitting cross-legged, whispering a poem to a girl selling figs. Between verses, he chews on a stick of cinnamon bark. His teeth aren't perfect, stained and a bit uneven, but his confidence is unmistakable. You think maybe that's half the magic. Further down the street, you see another suitor clutching a small linen pouch around his neck. You ask what it holds. He grins sheepishly and pulls out a withered sprig of dill and a carved ivory charm shaped like a tongue. For eloquence, he says, and for breath that doesn't scare away cats. These charms were common. Amulets worn for luck, health, and yes, oral freshness. Some were etched with hieroglyphs. Others were blessed by priests. A few, rather daringly, were soaked in wine and held in the mouth during courtship conversations. Slurred words aside, it must have made things memorable. You pause to reflect. In a world without chewing gum, breath mints, or mouth spray, Egyptians had built an entire mini-industry around smelling decent when whispering sweet nothings. Herbs, oils, scented paste, anything to keep the breath pleasant and the gods, or at least your date, impressed. But not all efforts were successful. You hear an old tale from a perfume seller nearby about a nobleman who once tried a breath potion made from boiled fish liver and powdered lotus root. It worked, sort of. His breath was floral, yes, but also faintly marine. The poor man became a temple punchline for weeks. Smelled like Aphrodite on a fishing boat, they said. Still, the importance of the mouth was more than cosmetic. It was the gateway of speech, of intention. Your breath was your essence. If it was fragrant, your soul must be pure, or at least trying. You stroll slowly back toward home, a soft breeze rustling the linen sleeves at your wrists. In the distance, a couple shares a quiet laugh beneath a fig tree. You imagine them both discreetly chewing on herbs earlier, tucking amulets into belts, praying their breath speaks well of them. It's sweet, really. Not just the breath, but the effort, the care, the belief that every word, every kiss, every smile begins with a moment of thoughtfulness, and perhaps a pinch of ground mint under the tongue. You run your tongue across your teeth, tasting the herb still clinging faintly. It's not minty gum or toothpaste foam, but it's something. Something ancient. Something personal. And it feels just right. As twilight descends and the sky over Thebes bruises into shades of plum and dusty pink, your thoughts turn to something a little heavier. The end. Not the end of the day, though that's certainly coming, but the end of life. And what comes after. Because in ancient Egypt, teeth didn't stop mattering just because you'd shuffled off this mortal linen. In fact, oral hygiene was just as important in death as it was in life, perhaps even more so. You find yourself passing a group of artisans working by flickering torchlight on funerary objects. They're carving tiny cosmetic jars, sculpting ushabti figurines, and yes, look at that, packing a small box of dental tools. Not symbolic ones either. Real ones. Tweezers, bronze toothpicks, fragments of tooth-scraping sticks. A full dental kit for the afterlife. Because nothing says eternal comfort like being able to clean your teeth in eternity. You step closer and watch one artisan wrap a fine linen pouch around a twig and a small jar of powder. Burnt eggshell again, of course. The jar is sealed with beeswax and inscribed with a tiny offering formula. It's beautiful and oddly touching. Someone believed that their loved one might want to keep up appearances even after being embalmed and entombed. Historians still debate whether these items were meant to be used in some spiritual sense. Did the dead brush their spiritual teeth? Or were they offerings? Reminders of who the person had been, what they valued. A little nod to their mortal habits. He always brushed after beer, you can imagine someone saying at the embalming. The embalming process itself, come to think of it, included a lot of mouth-related attention. The opening of the mouth ceremony, which we mentioned before, was more than a symbolic gesture, it was a critical rite. A ritual tool, often shaped like a forked fish spine or an iron blade, was pressed against the mouth of the deceased to open their senses, allowing them to breathe, eat, speak, and taste again in the afterlife. And if you're wondering, yes, there are tombs where the mummified body's teeth were carefully cleaned or even filled before burial. Archaeologists have discovered remains where broken teeth were bound with linen or stuffed with resin to seal cracks. In some elite mummies, resin even fills empty sockets where teeth had been lost, like early dentures made of tree sap and ritual intent. You pause by a small shrine and look at the carved reliefs. A priest offers a lotus flower to a seated figure who smiles benevolently, white teeth intact despite being 3,000 years old. Or at least they're drawn that way. Egyptian art was aspirational. If you wanted to be remembered with good teeth, you just asked the painter nicely. But not everyone entered the afterlife with such dental fanfare. Poorer Egyptians were often buried without any personal effects, sometimes in mass graves. Still, their bones tell stories. Many show signs of dental wear, abscesses, and even attempts at prehistoric fillings. Bits of linen and resin packed into molars. These were desperate acts, probably painful, but they also show something tender. People cared. They tried. You sit by the riverbank as the stars emerge, letting the breeze carry away the day's warmth. You think about how many people through time have stood right here, brushing, rinsing, hoping they'd be remembered with clean breath and a peaceful smile. There's even a belief whispered in the temple corridors that the gods judge your breath, not figuratively, literally. A foul mouth, they say, is a sign of corruption. A clean one, a sign of readiness. It's why certain mortuary spells include lines like, "My mouth is pure, my breath is the breath of Ma'at." Ma'at being truth, balance, order, the big cosmic checklist. You dip your fingers into the Nile and splash water on your face. The river smells earthy, old. You wonder what people will say of you centuries from now. What will they find? A jar of paste? A worn stick? A mouth perhaps still curled in a smile? The stars wink down like grains of ground pumice in the night sky. And somewhere, someone is being embalmed with care. Their mouth gently wrapped. A final rinse, maybe. And a promise. In the world to come, there will be no more grit, no more rot, no more pain. Just silence. Clean, sacred silence. The moon has risen fully now, casting a silver sheen over Thebes and bathing the narrow alleyways in quiet. You're heading away from the main temples, past the stalls that have shuttered for the night, and toward the edge of the workman's village. Here the air smells more like clay and ash than perfume. This is where the real grit of Egyptian life plays out. Not the palace version, but the version full of calloused hands and chipped teeth. A man squats in front of his doorway, chewing slowly on a reed. Not because he's bored, but because his tooth hurts. You've seen him before? He's a potter by day, kneading clay with the same hands that now press gingerly against his cheek. His mouth is swollen. He tells you through clenched teeth that he cracked a molder last week on a stone hidden in his bread. He can't afford to go to the temple. So he's trying something else, do-it-yourself dentistry, 1400 BCE style. You sit beside him and he shows you his tools. A reed stalk for poking, a bit of river mud he's mixed with powdered charcoal, and a tightly wrapped linen cloth that he's been biting down on to relieve the pain. It smells faintly of old beer and onions. Not exactly minty fresh, but the best he can do. This, you realize, is the dental care of the working class. No priest with polished bronze tools. No imported myrrh or incense. Just improvisation, grit, and sheer stubbornness. And somehow it works, at least enough to get through the day. You watch him use the reed to probe gently into the sore spot, trying to clear it of whatever's lodged there. He winces. You wince with him. There's a tense silence broken only by the quiet hiss of the night wind and the occasional croak of a distant frog. Then he spits into the dirt and shrugs. Better, he says, even if it clearly isn't. Historians still debate how common DIY dental methods were, but archaeological evidence backs it up. In humble graves, researchers have found skulls with odd gouge marks around the teeth. Scraping and picking damage? likely from makeshift tools like sharpened sticks or bits of copper. Sometimes even toothpick grooves worn so deeply into the enamel they almost broke the tooth in half. That's commitment or desperation, probably both. You ask if he's ever tried one of the old folk remedies, and he nods. Boiled lettuce, he says, and fig sap, warm, then swish. You blink. Not because it's odd, everything is odd at this point, but because you're pretty sure that same mixture was offered to you as soup 2 nights ago. He also mentions a poultice he once made with mashed garlic, honey, and crushed barley. You vaguely remember that being a recipe for a temple offering, but sure, dual purposes. His wife emerges with a bowl of something thicker, darker. It smells sweet, earthy, and smoky. Date syrup and myrrh, she says. Good for swelling. She gently presses it along his jawline, a ritual in and of itself. You sit quietly, witnessing not just a medical moment, but a small act of care. Of resilience. Because even here, where sandals wear thin and dinner is whatever didn't rot in the sun, people still care about their mouths, about comfort, about dignity. You think back to the temple and its tidy rows of tools, its scrolls filled with formal prescriptions. And then you look at the potter's home. Crumbly walls, soot-blackened ceiling, and a broken jawbone drying in the rafters, likely from an animal, or not. The contrast is sharp. But the human instinct behind it? The same. And here's a quirky fact. Some ancient Egyptian amulets were specifically meant to soothe toothaches. Small blue-green faience charms shaped like teeth or open mouths. People would rub them, pray to them, or wear them around their necks in hopes of relief. Were they magical? Maybe. Were they placebo? Probably. But either way, they brought hope. You stand up, thanking the man for sharing his story. He offers you the reed, joking that it's lucky. You decline politely and give him a palm frond basket in return. Yours has been collecting dust anyway. As you walk back through the village, you think about how even without formal medicine, people found ways to survive their pain. They chewed roots, they rinsed with warm beer, they applied poultices and whispered prayers, and they endured. Because that's what humans do, with or without a dentist. The night deepens, and the city sounds begin to fade, replaced by the soft chirping of insects and the hush of the Nile slipping past its banks. As you make your way back along the winding path between houses and courtyards, your mind wanders to something toothier. Something lurking not in the dental kits or kitchen mortar bowls, but in myth. You've heard the tales. Whispers of gods and creatures with a peculiar obsession for mouths, for teeth, for breath. And one in particular keeps surfacing in your thoughts. The crocodile, not just any crocodile, mind you. Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of strength, fertility, and oddly enough, protection. Egyptians had a complicated relationship with these leathery beasts. On one hand, terrifying apex predators. On the other, sacred creatures, keepers of divine secrets, guardians of balance. Some legends say Sobek's teeth were so clean and sharp that they could cleave through falsehoods, that he never suffered decay because his breath was an extension of the sacred Nile. And if your own teeth were failing, well, you might whisper a prayer to Sobek, or leave an offering near the water's edge, though doing so without being bitten was half the miracle. You stop near a small shrine dedicated to him, tucked between crumbling reeds. An oil lamp flickers inside, casting long shadows across a crocodile carving so realistic it makes you step back. In the corner, you notice a small bundle of herbs, frayed papyrus, frankincense, and what looks like a crocodile tooth. Probably carved. Hopefully carved. Historians still argue whether Sobek's connection to oral health was literal or metaphorical. But the myths persist. Some ancient healing spells call on the bite of the river lord to banish toothaches. Others involve bathing your mouth with water collected at dawn from a spot where crocodiles have swum. Though, again, approach with caution. Nobody wants dental care that comes with a risk of limb loss. But Sobek wasn't the only figure obsessed with mouths. Taweret, the hippo-headed goddess of childbirth and protection, was also invoked in tooth-related charms, especially for children. In homes all across Egypt, small figurines of Taweret were placed beside sleeping infants, believed to ward off bad dreams, infections, and teething pain. Ancient teething rings? Not quite. But teething amulets? Absolutely. One especially odd spell found scrawled on a scrap of linen involves tying a strand of hair from a nursing mother around a baby's wrist while chanting, "Let the pain of the tooth pass to the river." Did it work? Who's to say? But you can imagine the comfort it brought a panicked parent. And then there were the 7 Hathors, goddesses who governed fate and sometimes presided over illness. If your toothache refused to go away, some believed it was because one of the Hathors had taken offense. A missed offering, a poorly sung hymn, or just bad luck. A quick chant, a burnt fig offering, and perhaps your molar would settle down. You pause at the edge of a canal, watching the water ripple. Somewhere in that moving mirror, stories once swirled of gods, flossing with moonlight and scrubbing their divine fangs with gold dust. You imagine Anubis holding a toothbrush like a ceremonial staff, or Ra shining his teeth so brightly they formed the stars. Absurd, maybe, but also beautiful, because in Egyptian myth, the body was never separate from the divine. Breath was life, words were power, and the mouth, clean, open, functional, was the gateway to both. And if it ached, swelled, or reeked, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was unnatural. A disruption of cosmic order. Something to be soothed, honored, restored. You sit on a stone ledge beside the water and think about how deeply this belief ran. That a crocodile's bite could be sacred. That a toothache wasn't just a nuisance, but a sign. That brushing, rinsing, whispering charms. It was all part of something larger. Something eternal. In the distance, a priest lights incense. Somewhere, a mother ties a tiny amulet to her child's neck. And here you are, mouth still tingling faintly from earlier rinses, picturing crocodiles with dental routines. You smile, and just for a moment, the night seems to grin back. The moon hangs high overhead now, pale and heavy like a peeled fig, and you make your way toward a cluster of quiet tombs, just beyond the city's edge. No tourists here, no guides, just low, crumbling entrances and hieroglyphs softened by centuries of wind. You duck your head and step inside one of the smaller ones, a single-room tomb belonging to a mid-tier scribe from the 18th dynasty. His name, carved lovingly in the stone, Nahasi, scribe of granaries, lover of lemongrass tea. Well, you added that last part. What draws you in isn't the usual funerary art of deities and processions. It's what's tucked near the back wall. A jawbone, clean, yellowed, placed reverently inside a tiny linen-wrapped basket beside a faded wooden brush. It's not a coincidence. Tombs in Egypt often serve as time capsules, offering a glimpse into what people valued in life. And for many, that included the things they used daily: combs, sandals, cosmetic jars, and yes, dental tools. Some tombs contain pots of dentifrice. Others, tiny bone toothpicks or bronze implements that would have made your modern hygienist faint. A few even include notes to the gods, "Keep my breath sweet," or "May I speak in the West with a clean tongue." You kneel and study the jawbone, worn down teeth flattened like sea pebbles, evidence of a lifetime of chewing sandy bread, but still intact, still honored. Historians still argue whether these offerings were practical, just in case the dead needed them, or symbolic. But you can almost hear Nahasi saying, "Look, I don't want to meet Anubis with my mouth tasting like goat cheese." Fair. You reach out and gently touch the rim of a ceramic jar nearby. Inside, you imagine the faintest trace of powder clings to the corners. Burnt eggshells and maybe a pinch of clove. It's strangely moving. A toothbrush for eternity. Back in 1922, when Howard Carter first peered into Tutankhamun's tomb, he reportedly found small brushes, pastes, and even containers that may have once held fragrant oils or breath-freshening resins. The boy king may have had crooked teeth and a clubbed foot, but he wasn't about to go into the afterlife with stinky breath. And it wasn't just kings. Workers from Deir el-Medina, the famed artisan village that built the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, also left behind signs of dental attention. In their cemeteries, archaeologists discovered simple tools carved from wood or copper, and jawbones with visible wear from constant cleaning. Even in death, presentation mattered. You picture the living saying their final farewells, wrapping loved ones carefully in linens, slipping in a favorite tooth-cleaning twig, a scented oil, maybe even a charm carved with the phrase, "Open my mouth that I may speak." Mouths weren't just for speaking, they were for identity. Your name, your stories, your prayers, all passed through them. And so, preserving the mouth in death was vital. No detail too small, no molder too mundane. A fringe theory exists, whispered among fringe archaeologists, that some tomb brushes weren't for the deceased at all, but for visiting spirits. Offerings. The idea being that ghosts, restless or reverent, might pause to freshen up before drifting back to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. A spectral spa stop. Far-fetched? Maybe. But you glance at the brush again and wonder. It's worn at the tip. Used, not ceremonial. Someone used this, perhaps even after death. You sit in the cool quiet of the tomb, letting the silence wrap around you like linen. The stone walls absorb the sounds of your breath, your thoughts. It's oddly comforting being here among people who, thousands of years ago, fretted over their teeth and halitosis, just as you do now. You run your tongue along your teeth, imagining the crunch of barley bread, the bitterness of natron, the cool sting of mint resin. And you feel connected, not just to a history book, but to a human rhythm. A daily ritual, a need for comfort, for health, for dignity. You bow your head slightly, a small nod to Nehazi. His toothbrush may have crumbled, his powder turned to dust, but his care, his intention remains. And that, you think, is immortality. You leave the tomb in silence, stepping carefully over wind-blown pebbles and drifting back toward the edge of the city. A soft hush lingers in the night air, broken only by distant murmurs and the low, sleepy song of frogs nestled by the river. But even now, back among the living, beauty remains a constant obsession. And in ancient Egypt, a clean, white smile was more than just nice. It was power, it was youth, it was divine. You pass a courtyard where a group of women sit under a flickering oil lamp, combing hair, painting eyes with kohl, and, yes, polishing their teeth. One rubs her gums gently with a strip of linen soaked in mint and honey. Another applies a chalky paste to her front teeth and scrapes it clean with a thin bronze pick. They laugh softly, comparing results, perhaps preparing for a festival or just trying to outshine a neighbor. In Egyptian culture, the mouth was more than just a functional opening. It was a visual signature. A bright smile spoke of health, cleanliness, and inner order, ma'at, that sacred harmony. The gods were often depicted with perfect teeth, white and straight. Pharaohs had statues made to reflect that same ideal. And here's the twist. These ideals weren't just held by the elites. Even commoners aspired to the divine smile. Maybe they didn't have access to pearl powder or imported pumice, but they worked with what they had. Burnt wood, salt, vinegar rinses, even lemon juice. No, don't try that last one without enamel insurance. One lesser-known but charming practice involved rubbing teeth with crushed seashells, believed to bring a brilliant luster. Effective? Well, probably not gentle, but the shine? Noticeable. Historians still debate whether this was purely cosmetic or had ceremonial undertones, especially when applied during weddings or religious rites. And vanity wasn't gendered. Men, too, took care to maintain their smiles. Some applied ivory dust, others chewed licorice root to soften their breath and polish their molars. One particularly meticulous noble reportedly had 3 different pastes, one for cleaning, one for whitening, and one simply to honor the breath before the gods. You can't argue with that kind of branding. As you observe the group, you notice a younger girl using a curved sliver of copper to gently lift plaque from between her teeth. No blood. No flinching. She's done this before. She holds a polished piece of obsidian like a mirror, angling it to catch the lamp's flicker as she inspects her work. Satisfied, she slips the tool into a pouch at her belt and smiles, wide and proud. And it's not just about appearance, it's about social currency. A clean mouth suggests control, discipline, desirability. You'd never show up to court divine or royal with foul breath and yellowed teeth. That would be like wearing muddy sandals to a banquet. Even the famous Book of the Dead, A Guide to the Afterlife, includes spells for the mouth. Not just to ensure speech, but purity. Let my mouth be pure. Let my teeth be strong. Let my tongue speak truth, it reads. Your smile, it turns out, was as much a passport to the eternal fields of reeds as your heart. You think back to one odd little detail you heard from a scribe. Some wealthier Egyptians used crushed lapis lazuli in their paste. Not because it helped, just because it sparkled. Imagine scrubbing your mouth with crushed gemstones just to make your breath more fabulous. Peak decadence. But beauty was subjective too. Some tomb paintings depict figures with slightly gapped teeth, which scholars now believe may have been a sign of charm, or at least not something shameful. The real sin was neglect. Letting your teeth rot was like letting your temple crumble, a sign that your soul might be crumbling too. You catch your reflection in a puddle. The moon shimmers across it, warping your features. Your teeth gleam slightly, or maybe that's just wishful thinking. Either way, you smile. Not because it's perfect, but because it's present. Clean, thoughtful, intentional. A few steps later, you pass a statue of Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and love. Her lips are curved in a slight, knowing smile. You like to imagine she'd approve of a bit of dental primping. After all, what good is a hymn if the breath behind it makes the flowers wilt? You take one last look back at the women in the courtyard, still chatting, still brushing, still laughing. Their teeth not gleaming like pearls, but glowing with effort and pride. And that too is beauty. The wind picks up slightly as you walk along the outer wall of a temple district, the linen of your tunic fluttering gently at your ankles. The stars now sparkle with abandon, the kind of high sky brilliance only ancient nights can afford. But your thoughts have turned darker, not fearful, just more grounded. Because despite all the rinses and roots, the sticks and salves, sometimes things just went wrong. And when ancient Egyptian dentistry failed, it really failed. You stop beside a half-built wall where a few laborers once worked, now long gone. A cracked skull peeks out from beneath some stones, its jaw half intact, several teeth missing entirely. The visible molars are ground to flat nubs, one with a massive abscess that once would have swollen the face like a ripening fig. This wasn't rare, not by a long shot. Archaeologists have found countless skulls showing signs of extreme oral distress. Abscesses that tunnel into bone, molars worn down to the root, infected cavities filled with linen and resin, like ancient root canals with absolutely no anesthesia. One particularly infamous specimen bears a piece of splintered wood lodged permanently between 2 back teeth. Possibly a toothpick that broke off and got stuck. Forever. Historians still argue whether some of these treatments were meant to heal or just ease the pain temporarily. One theory suggests that when a tooth couldn't be extracted, and extractions were dangerous, even deadly, a kind of palliative dentistry emerged. Packs of herbs, linen dipped in wine, pressure applied with a stone. All more ritual than cure, but rituals in Egypt mattered. And for those with the means, dentistry turned brutal. In one royal tomb, a skull was found, with a hole bored into the jawbone, likely an attempt to drain an abscess. The tool used? a sharpened bronze spike. Did the patient survive? Debatable. Did it help? Marginally. But it shows something haunting. They were trying. Against all odds, they were trying to fix it. You duck into a side alley where a medicine cellar once operated. A clay shelf still holds crumbled remnants of dried herbs, pottery fragments, and a few thin copper probes. He wasn't a priest or a trained healer, just someone who knew how to numb a gum line long enough to sell you some goat fat and wish you luck. You remember one of the old folk recipes from a scroll, a particularly odd one that involved applying rotting mouse meat to the aching side of the face. The logic? The decaying flesh would draw out the sickness. It's hard to say what was worse, the pain or the cure. Still, the desperation is familiar. Anyone who's had a toothache at 2 a.m. understands it perfectly. And sometimes you couldn't even get help. The poor often died with mouths full of decay, unspoken prayers, and no one to rinse their mouths with myrrh. Yet their bones tell the same stories as kings. Pain has no class loyalty. You sit for a moment on a low stone, the kind that has seen 1,000 heels before yours. You think of the woman who buried her husband with a carved ivory pick tucked into his shroud, not because he needed it, but because he'd used it every night after dinner for 20 years. It was who he was, a man who cared about his teeth, or the child found with a tiny amulet in the shape of a tooth, possibly teething, possibly dying of an infection that today would be cured in 10 minutes. You stare into the dark and feel something deep and echoing stir inside. Because for all their ingenuity, the Egyptians lost a lot of battles with the body. And yet they didn't give up. They believed every crack in the enamel was worth tending. Every swollen jaw worth blessing. Every lost tooth worth mourning. That's not failure, that's faith. You stand, stretching, jaw tingling sympathetically. You've never appreciated your toothbrush more than you do right now. But you also appreciate their courage, the grit, the herbs, the pliers made of hope. Because sometimes the most human thing you can do is go to bed in pain, clutch a copper pick in one hand, and whisper a prayer to a god with crocodile teeth. The wind whispers gently as you wander toward the outskirts of the village, where the stars are brightest and the silence feels thicker. The kind of quiet that invites reflection, especially when your jaw still aches in sympathy for that poor soul with the bronze spike abscess treatment. You find yourself drawn to a small bench carved into the limestone slope, a favorite resting spot for elders. Tonight, it's empty, but you sit anyway, the stone cool beneath you. And your thoughts drift, fittingly, to wisdom teeth. Yes, the great molars of maturity, those final gatekeepers at the back of the jaw. In modern times, they're mostly pulled out before they wreak havoc. But in ancient Egypt, they were respected, even revered. There's no specific term in hieroglyphs that translates directly to wisdom teeth, but the concept of dental aging was clearly recognized. Skeletons have revealed that many older Egyptians retained these late bloomers far into adulthood, albeit in various states of distress. Impacted, worn, cracked, but present, and symbolic. For some, losing teeth was a rite of passage, a sign you'd earned your place among the wise. A gappy smile wasn't shameful, it was a badge. Elders without teeth were respected for their endurance. They'd chewed through decades of gritty bread and spicy beer. They deserved to gum their way through pomegranate seeds if they wanted. You remember hearing that amulets shaped like teeth were sometimes passed down, generation to generation. Not for luck, but as a sign of ancestral wisdom. A literal heir tooth. You chuckle quietly to yourself. Okay, that one wasn't in the scrolls. And there's something else. Magical papyri speak of tooth loss dreams, where someone would dream of their teeth falling out, and scribes would interpret the meaning. Often it signified a change in leadership, a death in the family, or a spiritual transformation. Teeth, once again, weren't just bones in your mouth. They were metaphors for control, power, presence. One particular spell, reserved for the elderly, was chanted during moments of illness. Let the teeth remain, though the tongue falters. Let the mouth speak clearly, though the jaw wearies. A beautiful thought. A kind of prayer that even when your body betrays you, your voice, your essence remains intact. You glance up at the stars. Somewhere, long ago, someone your age, maybe older, maybe younger, but aged by labor and drought, sat here too, jaw aching, trying to remember what chewing with molars used to feel like. You imagine a grandfather teaching his grandchild how to carve a toothbrush from a branch, or a grandmother preparing a warm rinse of chamomile and date syrup for her daughter-in-law, who's losing her first tooth during pregnancy. These aren't dentist visits, they're rituals of love. Historians still debate the social status of toothless elders. Were they pitied? Revered? Probably both. Some scrolls suggest that priests with too many missing teeth were gently retired, unable to properly recite long hymns or lead call and response rituals. Others were given easier duties: incense tending, water blessing, record keeping, tasks of quiet, steady dignity. You hear a rustling behind you and turn, half expecting a ghostly elder with a gold-handled toothbrush. But it's just a breeze playing through the reeds. You pull your cloak tighter and think about the way we measure age and strength. In ancient Egypt, strength wasn't just physical, it was survival. You lived through grit, loss, drought, grinding stones, and funerals, and still offered a smile even if it was mostly gums. And wisdom. That wasn't in scrolls. It was in the way you remembered the name of every herb that soothed a sore mouth. The way you passed on your favorite toothstick to a grandchild. The way you held silence, then spoke only when it mattered. You run your tongue along your own molars and wonder, will anyone 1,000 years from now tuck their toothbrush into their coffin? Will they whisper thanks to a god for the gift of chewing? Or maybe they'll just think of you. Here, under this ancient sky, smiling at the thought of wisdom with no enamel and dignity without teeth. The night is deep now. The sounds of the city have faded into a soft hush, like the world itself is exhaling. You walk slowly through the still streets of Thebes, where flickering oil lamps cast sleepy golden halos on the walls, and sandals slap faintly on worn stone. It's time to wind down, just like the ancient Egyptians did, with one last ritual. Your final destination is a quiet home near the temple gardens, modest but tidy. Inside, a small family prepares for bed. A grandmother sits on a low stool with her granddaughter kneeling before her. It's time for the evening mouth cleansing, not just a practical step, but a sacred end to the day. She dips a cloth into a bowl of warm water infused with myrrh, astringent and earthy. The scent alone feels calming, grounding. With care, she wipes her granddaughter's lips and gums, murmuring softly about breath, the gods, and dreams. Then it's the girl's turn to do the same for her grandmother, who opens her mouth with the quiet dignity of someone who has done this ritual for 60 years. The girl hands over a small twig, already chewed at the tip. The older woman hums gently as she scrubs her teeth with it, slow, circular motions. There's no rush. The day is ending. The rhythm is meditative. You feel yourself slowing down, your thoughts stretching longer, softer. It reminds you of something a temple priest once said in passing. We begin the day with cleansing to speak clearly to the world. We end it with cleansing so the world may speak clearly to us in dreams. You take a seat nearby, accepting a bowl of lukewarm rinse water with herbs floating lazily across the top. Basil, mint, a bit of lemongrass. You sip, swish, and spit gently into the bowl. Not glamorous, not grand, but deeply, deeply human. There's a sense of closure in this act, a full circle moment. The Egyptians believed in cycles, sunrise and sunset, birth and death, waking and dreaming. Cleaning the mouth before sleep was both a nod to hygiene and a quiet prayer to the gods of the night. May my breath be sweet in slumber. May my mouth open to good dreams. Historians have long studied these nightly rituals, puzzled by how thoroughly they blend the mundane with the mystical. Was it about fighting decay? Warding off spirits? Practicing mindfulness before the word mindfulness existed? Maybe all of it. And there were accessories, too. One tomb included a small ceramic cup labeled, "For my night water." Another, a linen pouch with dried mint labeled, "To cleanse the tongue before Ra's journey." Imagine living in a world where even your toothbrush had poetry. As the family settles in, you watch the grandmother hang the twig brush on a little hook by the wall. Beside it, a string of amulets. One shaped like a tooth, another like a tongue, the last like a blooming lotus. Symbols of speech, of sweetness, of spiritual fragrance. You lie back on a mat they've offered, arms crossed gently over your chest in the traditional sleeping pose. The stone beneath you is hard, but somehow comforting. A breeze drifts through the open doorway. The linen curtain rustles. Someone hums a lullaby. And as your eyes begin to close, your mind lingers on this truth. In ancient Egypt, even the most personal act, brushing your teeth, was part of something greater. A ritual of respect, of order, of care. Not just for your body, but for your soul. You smile. A small one. Just enough to feel your clean teeth press gently against each other. Wind down. 300 words. The night wraps around you now, heavy and slow like linen soaked in warm oil. The city of Thebes slumbers behind closed shutters and drawn curtains, its breath rising in quiet rhythm with the Nile. Even the stars seem to drift, softened at the edges, barely twinkling. In this hushed moment, everything feels suspended. Your body resting, your breath even, your thoughts slowed to a gentle crawl. The stories of burnt eggshells, frayed twigs, resin rinses, and crocodile-headed gods swirl faintly in your mind, like sand in a jar of water, settling gently to the bottom. You shift slightly on the mat, the faint scent of myrrh still clinging to the air, like a whisper from earlier hours. The quiet rituals of ancient Egypt begin to blur with your own until it's hard to tell whether you're in your room or in a reed hut by the Nile. You remember the weight of a wooden toothbrush, the scrape of pumice on enamel, the cool rinse of herb-soaked water. And somewhere, in that fading space between waking and dreaming, you smile again. Not because your teeth are perfect, but because you've tended to them, because you've honored them, because you've remembered a world where even the simplest acts were sacred, and now, in this stillness, you drift. The gods have brushed their teeth, the world has gone quiet, and so should you. So,